Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I am Susan and want to welcome tonight Bob Hodge, who has been here periodically. He has a Sangha out at Whitehall, which some of you have attended, and it is flourishing. And we are so happy to have him here tonight.
So, what are you becoming? It's kind of an interesting question. And this talk actually is based in part on a meditation that I just happened to come across by accident by Thanissaro Bhikkhu. And he wrote this meditation, a reflection called As Days and Nights Fly By. As Days and Nights Fly By. And it's in one of his meditations. If any of you ever been to dhammatalks.org, I highly recommend that website because it's Thanissaro Bhikkhu's place where all of his talks, all of his books and things are there. And in fact, his latest book, which just came out in December, is called Noble Warrior. And it was written by him and another Kamatu Bhikkhu. And what they did is this is the Buddha's life in terms of the scriptures, in terms of the timing of when he was awakened, what he taught, and it has a map of where he traveled around in India, because there's not a whole lot about his life in the scriptures, but what they did is extracted that. And the nice thing about dhammatalks.org is that you can, first of all, you can write them and they'll send you this book for free. But you can also download it either as a PDF, an EPUB book, or a Mobi, which means you can put it on your Kindle. And so I actually downloaded this on my Kindle because that way, if those of you that use Kindle, you can use the search feature and you can go back and forth. So we had a number of donations of Thanissaro Bhikkhu's books, and so I just happened to I like to look over the books before we put them in our library, and I ran across this particular reflection, As Days and Nights Fly By. So what are you becoming is a very important question, because you might ask yourself, well, do you need to become anything? Well, the truth is that we're becoming all of the time. Whether we like it or not, we're becoming. And so it really comes down to what? It's a question of what, are you actually becoming? And how do we become? And what recommendations did the Buddha have in terms of what he recommended that we should become? So we're going to be exploring those topics as we go through the evening, leave some time for questions and discussion. But before we start, I'd like to get a little personal here and just have you close your eyes and just do some reflection. Think back to when you were in your teens. What were you becoming at that time? What were your intentions for living your life? And then move up to when you were in your 20s. What were you becoming then? Did it change from when you were in your teens? And then move up to your 30s. What were you becoming in that decade? Did it change from when you were in your 20s or when you were a teenager? Yeah, what were your intentions for living your life? And then just briefly just scan through the decades that bring you up to the present. Was there any shifts that went on? Did your becoming change? Did your intentions change? And then lastly, right now, here we are in the present. Do you have a set of intentions about what you intend to become? So you can open your eyes. Very interesting question. If we had more time, it would be fun to go around and compare notes. I was talking to my wife tonight at dinner, and I said, "What were you becoming when you were a teenager?" She said, "I don't have a good memory about that stuff." And as I was reflecting on it for myself, I think that as I would think about it, it's not a question of having a good memory or not, but I really would, and when you do your reflections, you've got to be non-judgmental and honest. And I think when I was a teenager, I didn't have a clue. I wouldn't say that I had a set of intentions. I was just becoming whatever was out there to become, not necessarily shifting. My parents, fortunately, had really given me a good ethical and moral background, so I wasn't drifting all that much. But as I moved into my 20s, I think I was just on that path of, you want to find a career that would be something that you could really get engaged in, want to find a partner in life, want to have security, want to settle down, and so forth and so on. And then moving on, your focus may have changed, and then there's a certain part, hopefully, in people's lives where they have all those things, and they want to give back. That they've lived a very satisfying life. Others may not be able to do that. So life just goes. For me, there were certain things that came up and took me in different directions, and I never would have predicted, looking back, of all the things that I've done and where I've gone and so forth. But was there any, intention there? Anything guiding that? I chose to go into medicine. And my father was a doctor. And I have to think that there were 3 reasons I went into medicine. To be non-judgmental and honest about it, I think the first thing was that it looked like a good career in terms of having a certain amount of autonomy and independence. And then secondly, it looked like a career that, paid well, able to have a good life. And then there was the helping others. And that was there, but to be honest, I'm not sure that was my primary intention, although that's what I said when they were interviewing me for medical school. So you look back on it in a non-judgmental fashion and you think, well, what would it have been like if I had done things a little bit differently, if my intention had been reverse or whatever. But you don't have to really deal with all that. What I want to really talk about is right now. What are your intentions? So let's look at what is becoming. Well, if you look up the dictionary, becoming means that you begin to be or to come to be something specified, to begin to have a specified quality. So what is quality? Well, quality is really what others perceive you to be, and perhaps what you perceive yourself to be. And so we won't go into the various issues about quality, good quality or bad quality, but just using quality as, I think we all want to become something of quality, and we want to be perceived that way as well. But the qualities that you become are really, in large part, dependent on what your intentions are, what your aim or purpose is in life. And the Buddha, he noticed in several of his teachings that there was a difference between skillful and unskillful intentions. And what he said was, and what, monks, is right intention? Intention for renunciation, intention for non-ill will, intention for non-harming. This, monks, is called right intention. So in other words, the Buddha is saying that for a person who has unskillful intentions of clinging, rather than letting go of renunciation, they're clinging to things, ill will or harmfulness, his or her deeds, words, plans, and purposes grounded in that view will lead to suffering. Whereas a person who holds opposite right intentions of letting go or renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness, his or her deeds, words, plans, and purposes grounded in that view will lead to happiness. So the Buddha was that's really what the Buddha was saying. And as Bonnie Gunaratara talks about what is karma, he says that skillful actions lead to happiness and unskillful habits lead to unhappiness. And the Buddha is saying, if you set your intentions, then you're really setting yourself on the path to happiness. And I want to make sure that we're talking about intentions. Intentions doesn't mean you're always going to do everything that you said you're going to do, but it's just your aim or your purpose. It's just the direction that you're taking. So then there's the process of becoming. So, how do we become? And the Buddha taught this as well. He really taught that we become through influences by our mind. Through influences by our mind. And how does our mind influence us? Well, it's really based on our experiences in life, because that's really what influences. So how does the mind and experiences, how do those get tied together? Well, as you know, we have 6 sense organs. We have our body for sensation, we have our eyes for seeing, we have our ears for hearing, we have our nose for smelling, and our tongue and mouth for taste. And then we have our mind for thinking, for thought process, and so forth. So how does that work? Well, how it works is, let's say that you see somebody, or you all are looking at me. So what happens is your sense organ, your eye, meets a sense object, Bob, and that's really the experience you're having, just with your sight. Just talk about just the sight, not listening to what I'm saying or whatever. Well, what happens with that is that goes into our awareness, into our consciousness. And when it's in our consciousness, that's when the mind takes over. Because what does the mind do? The mind actually takes whatever we're experiencing at that time and compares it to the past memories and beliefs of where we've seen that before. It's a process of identification. So some of you have been here on previous occasions. You've seen Bob up here teaching. Others of you haven't. So you have out here, different memories of Bob. They may be favorable, they may be unfavorable, but how did that occur? That occurred basically because your mind is making all these comparisons. And the mind gets back to you this on 2 levels. Your mind gets back to you on a sensory level. There's a bodily sensation that occurs. And this is often ignored because we tend to think that all of our perceptions and things like that occur in the mind. But before that occurs, actually, you either have a pleasant or unpleasant feeling, or maybe a neutral feeling. You've never seen me before, you just don't have any feelings one way or the other. But your body is transmitting. That's one way they're communicating with you. The other way is through your perceptions. The mind is making an identification, a mental impression. And besides its Bob, with the bodily feeling, there's a favorable or unfavorable, perhaps, feeling that goes on. And as a result, the mind is really making a recommendation to you. The mind is saying, I think you better leave right now, because the last time I heard him, it just wasn't worth sitting through what he had to say. Or they would say, I think I may sit here and listen. But unlike a friend that's sitting next to you that leans over and says, that's Bob, and frankly, I think you ought to leave. And you say, well, I don't know. I don't know you that well, and I think I'll stay. We tend to believe our mind. No matter what our mind says, we tend to believe it. We don't think of our mind as being a friend. We think of it just as it's us. That's a part of us, and whatever we get in our mind, we're going to do. So let's take another example. Let's get away from Bob. But let's say you just see someone that you've had a previous unpleasant experiences with before. So all you do is see them. But by the very fact that you saw them, your mind is processing that. It's bringing up that person. You're getting an unpleasant feeling, a bodily sensation, and you're also getting this mental impression that I don't think I want to have a conversation with this person because the last 3 times it came out badly. We got in an argument or whatever. And all of this occurred just because we were seeing that person. We just had a sight. I'll give you an example of that. When I was in the medical center at the University of Missouri, my office was in one part of the medical center, and I had to go down all these corridors for meetings. And there was this one person that was a nice person, but if every time I said hello, there would be like a 10-minute conversation, and I would end up being late to the meeting. So my eyes, once they saw that person, my mental impression was, my bodily feeling was unpleasant, and my perception was that this is not going to be something I want to get in a conversation with. And so out of that came a reaction. And what was my reaction? It was to look for any escape route. And if there was no escape route, then it was taking a deep breath and just going and doing the best I could. But you see how the mind was giving me a recommendation. Bob, go hide, go. Whereas it might have been that having an encounter might have been very pleasurable, particularly if I wasn't late for something, on a meeting. But it was this mind and the beliefs that this person was going to do this to me that caused me to have that intention just to escape rather than be open, to possibility. So that's how we become, because we become through the influences of our mind, what our mind is telling us. And actually, these are called recommendations of the mind, and what the Buddha called these recommendations are fabrications. He called those recommendations fabrications, that your perceptions, the bodily feeling that you're getting is a fabrication. And the reason he called it a fabrication is because the mind is just inventing whatever it recommends on the best data that it has. But if you look at the mind being in a cave without any other things it can check on other than past memories and beliefs, and that's what the recommendation is based on, then it's got to be some kind of fabrication. It doesn't mean that it's always true. So the moral of this story, or the lesson is, why do we always trust our mind? Why can't we question our mind just like we could question a person if they made us a recommendation? If a person comes up and said, vote for so-and-so, you say, well, I need to check in a little bit more or whatever. If your mind says vote for so-and-so, you just might go ahead and do it. Because it's more difficult to argue with your mind, to have a conversation. Although the mind is sending you these clear signals. It's sending you these sensations. It's sending you the mental impressions, and you just need to realize that. Another story. I was chairman of a committee at the medical center, and one of the administrative people, it seemed like that every time I brought up what I felt was a brilliant idea, this person would have all these negative, comments about it. And then I would get defensive, and it would get in kind of an argument. And what I learned from that experience over time was to trust my body. That when I felt this burning sensation creeping up like this, the recommendation was, Bob, keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything, talk about it later, or whatever. So that's an example of being able to read the signals, what your mind is doing to you, making recommendations, and asking yourself, is it true or not? To really investigate. And that's where mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness is paying attention moment to moment to what is. And the what is, the moment that you have an unpleasant bodily sensation, is that I need to check and see if this is true. Why am I having this unpleasant feeling? What is my mind telling me? And then decide, what to go. I had an interesting experience the other day. I live out in Whitehall, coming in on Barracks Road. You get to the 250 bypass that goes over, and if you want to turn left onto that, there's usually a pretty long wait at the light because all this traffic that's going west there, particularly at rush hour or whatever. And so I was behind this car, and my impression was this person had never taken driver training because they didn't pull out into the intersection. They just stayed there. And as I'm looking over like this, the traffic, was clear. It was obviously time to make a left-hand turn so we could both, get through the intersection. And what I found is that my hand was 2 inches away from the horn, but recognizing, why did I do that? I pulled my hand back. But that was just an example of, I was surprised at myself that I actually I looked at my hand there and I actually pulled it back. I'm surprised I pulled it back. But that's really just the idea of you get this unpleasant feeling that's building up. Your mind is making a recommendation to blow that horn or do something, and you said, I'm going to do something different. I have the right to choose, and we'll come back to that. So, how can we consciously become? How can we consciously become as these experiences are happening? And so I go to Thanissaro Bhikkhu in his reflection as days and nights fly by. And he notes that, painful experiences occur. Painful experiences, you see an unpleasant person, you're behind a car that's not turning left, all these things. And of course, obviously more painful things that can be of more, what you would consider to be more of a serious nature. And what Thanissaro Bhikkhu says is even though they're inevitable and potentially very painful, you don't have to suffer from them. The question is, how do you learn not to suffer from these things? And the answer is that you develop qualities of mind, and you also develop a certain attitude towards life. This is crucial. You need to gain a sense of what's really important in this limited amount of time span that we have when the body's still healthy, still relatively young, still functioning, at least to some extent, and still alive. What's really worth doing in this life? And he goes on to say, so the Buddha doesn't have you reflect on, what am I gathering up as days and nights fly past? What am I gathering up as days and nights fly past? But what am I becoming? What kind of person are you becoming? What qualities of mind are you developing? Are you developing desire, ill will, laziness or complacency, restlessness and worry or doubt? Or are you developing heedfulness? Or are you developing mindfulness? Because as the Buddha said, the things that we tend to think about form an inclination for the mind, or as we would say, ruts for the mind. Ways in which you tend to act, ways in which you tend to think, that as you keep repeating them become harder and harder to leave. Now, those of you may know when I mention these 5 things that you could be becoming, the desire, ill will, laziness, restlessness, and worry or doubt, those are the 5 aggregates of clinging that the Buddha said causes suffering. And so if you look at desire, what am I gathering up as days and nights fly past? Is it all the things you desire, for example? Or if it's ill will, is it just using all these experiences, converting them into ill will, and being angry for most of your life? So Thanissaro Bhikkhu goes on to say, for a lot of people, as days and nights fly past, all they can think about is, how can I cram in as many pleasures and memories as possible? The old bucket list. I want to make sure I'm not missing out on anything. Of course, when you do one thing, you're missing out on something else. Like packing a suitcase. The more you cram in, the more other things are going to spill out. And if you take the attitude that the value of life lies in having lots of memories, well, we all know what the process of memory is like. We stash away certain ideas, and as they get brought up from the mind to reflect on, each time you put them back in the mind, they get changed. And after a while, your memories get distorted and deformed. So what's left? A lot of lies the mind is telling itself about the past. They may look like gold, but they're fake. So that's the other thing that we tend to believe the mind about, that when that memory comes up, is it really true? Is that really an accurate memory of actually what happened at that time? I know many of you have been in conversation. I know that when Sandy and I are talking out with another couple, Sandy will be saying, well, Bob and I on this vacation, we did this and that. I said, we never did that. And I would say, we did this. And Sandy said, we never did that. And we were both on the same vacation together. We were at the same place observing the same waterfall, sunset, or whatever. But it's 2 distinct memories. And even with that evidence, we still trust our memories to be accurate. So it's really admitting to yourself that the memory may be just what we want to remember, not actually, what happened. So if we're not aware, what we can become over time is a product of accepting our mind's recommendations from stored memories and beliefs. So if we're always letting the mind choose for us, we inevitably fall prey to one of the hindrances: the desire, the ill will, the complacency or laziness, the restlessness and worry, and the doubt. And I know that if I look back over my life, I can see where each one of those things has trapped me on occasion. The desire for this, the desire for that, the ill will that comes up, particularly, in these days and times with the political situation being up, there's a lot of potential for ill will. But when those things grab us, we're losing sight of what our intention, might really be. So if we're really aware, then what can we do? What can we do to really develop our intentions and to really have an aim or purpose in life? And so I'd like to give you 4 recommendations based on what the Buddha recommended. The first one, and I'll cover these just to give you the list, is to adopt the Buddha's recommendations for the intentions. Secondly, be mindful of your mind and make choices. First of all, feel that you can make a choice and then make those choices. The third one is to become a bodhisattva, become a bodhisattva. And the last one is add good memories to your storehouse. Because your storehouse is coming back on you, why not fill it with some good things that can go back rather than just bad things? Because as you all know, just as humans, as we've evolved over time, we really base our survival on what's called negativity bias. They're always looking for the dangers, what can happen to us. We don't really look for the good things that are happening because we take those for granted. So first of all, adopting the Buddha's 3 intentions. And what did he recommend? Well, he recommended this, of course, in his path, or what I call his prescription for happiness, the Eightfold Path, had 8 steps. And in one of these steps was called right intention. And his intention was really 3. One is the intention of letting go or renunciation. The other one, the second one, is loving kindness. And the third one is compassion. Now, what do all 3 of those have in common? What they have in common is love. When we're letting go, we're doing 2 things. We're actually letting go of what causes us to suffer, but we're also, when we're letting go, we also could be giving. Generosity, giving to others, giving back, supporting each other. So the intention of letting go is a Dharma talk in and of itself. In fact, it's a retreat talk. I'm giving a retreat in April out of my old Sangha in Missouri, and all we're going to do for that day and a half is just talk about the process of letting go. The second intention is loving kindness. I talked about loving kindness a little bit in our meditation, but that's really seeing the goodness in others, wishing yourself well and wishing others well. I recently, I'm almost done with it, but I highly recommend Tara Brach's latest book that came out in December, Radical Compassion. Has any of you had a chance to look at that? She has just a wonderful chapter on loving kindness and mirroring the goodness in others, and goes deeper than I've ever read before. But loving kindness, just when you're meditating, you're making connections, you're wishing other well. You're seeing the goodness in them. You're actually seeing the goodness in those that you might feel some ill will about. Because as Tara Brach says, goodness is our default position. She gives a story of the fact that in Thailand, this was back in the 80s, there was a big statue of the Buddha, and it was covered with clay. And so the monks were making way for another type of installation or whatever, and they tried to move the Buddha. And as they did, this clay cracked. And what they found out the bottom was the golden Buddha that's now in Bangkok, and it had been there for centuries. It had been hidden to keep it away from the invaders. And Tara Brach talks about that's really us. It's a good metaphor. For we have that gold inside us. It's just what do we do with that clay once it cracks, but we can help crack it and get rid of it. That's part of that letting go. So those three skillful intentions, I think, are worthwhile considering and keeping in mind. In fact, every day, it doesn't hurt to say, my intention is to keep letting go, practice generosity, practice loving kindness, and practice compassion, not only for others, but for myself as well. And to me, that's all you need. That's really the three, that's love. What is more important than love? And that's really very practical ways to practice that. The next one is really to be mindful of your mind and make choices. So that's why I went in all that about how the sense organ makes contact with the sense object, and then the mind gives us a recommendation. And it's really realizing at that point, you have a choice. And there's a quote that's attributed to Viktor Frankl. And what he says is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. Between when your mind tells you what you need to do and when you either respond to it, there's a space. And in that space lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our happiness. So my hand was that close to the steering wheel, but I had a choice. Decided not to go through with it. So that space appears when you are mindful that the mind is communicating with you through the bodily sensation and also through the mental impression and the perceptions that you get. And really, as you're trying to make that choice, the question comes up, do I really believe what the mind is recommending? Or should I remain open to possibility? Because the mind is actually closing you down, giving you some very narrow guidelines. Whereas if you open or spacious, you never know what might happen. Happened to me many times. How many times have you been at a party or someone, you've met someone, your mind is giving you an unfavorable impression, you press on and you find that's probably one of the most fascinating people you've talked to in the whole evening, and you've made a new friend or whatever. But that would have never happened if you weren't open to possibility. So basically, if you don't know what to believe or not, there's one other thing under that, and that is actually find someone else. Get a second opinion. Talk to a friend. If you don't have to make the choice, actually find someone else to talk to other than your mind. I found that to be a useful guideline as well. The third one is become a bodhisattva. And as you may know, a bodhisattva is an ordinary person who takes up a course in his or her life that moves in the direction to the path to joy, commitment, and peace. A bodhisattva lives by the vow of the three intentions of letting go, loving kindness, and compassion. So it's pretty easy to join the club. You just take that oath, you take those intentions, you're a bodhisattva. But I love what Tara Brach said in her first book, Radical Acceptance. She had two phrases about bodhisattvas. She phrased the first aspiration as, may my life be a benefit to all beings. May my life be a benefit to all beings. And may all circumstances serve to awaken compassion. May all circumstances serve to awaken compassion. Last week at our Sangha, Laura Good was teaching, and we got to talking about compassion towards the end of the discussion. And people were describing when they saw these things going on. They saw these people suffering, they saw these people arguing and so forth. And then what our inclination might be is to just ignore it, to put it out of our mind. But that is a circumstance to awaken our compassion. We might not be able to do anything at that particular moment, in that particular circumstance, but it really sensitizes us to the suffering that's going on in this world. So a bodhisattva has a lot of work to do, and it's those three intentions that really guide his or her life. And this is from the way of the bodhisattva. All the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others. All the misery the world contains has come through waiting has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. Has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. And the last one is really adding good memories to your storehouse. Another step in the Eightfold Path, which I think is largely overlooked, at least I overlooked it for a number of years, is called right effort. And that's really, how do you deal with your thoughts? You know, we have thoughts that are skillful, we have thoughts that are unskillful. And what the Buddha said, it's kind of a metaphor like a garden, that if you're growing vegetables, what you have are the following tasks. First of all, you need to prevent the weeds from arising. And if you can't prevent the weeds from rising, then you need to do something about the weeds, like pull them out, pluck them out. And with the vegetables, you need to nurture them so they'll grow, and then you need to maintain that growth. So we all deal with this negativity bias about the unskillful thoughts and how you deal with those. But how about making these good thoughts arise and maintaining them in our mind? So that when our storehouse of memories, our mind brings back good things. And so there's ways to do that. There's a nice exercise if we had time to do it. But it's really, remember any skillful act that you've done in the past and the pleasant or positive states of mind that went with that action. Just doing a meditation, reflecting on that. Recalling your past successes in battling greed, hatred, or delusion. That you can do it. You've done it before, but sometimes we never think about the times we did it before. We just think about the current situation and what am I going to do? And then lastly, apply your mind to figure out what actions created the pleasant, positive mental state. In Tara Brach's book, she talks about people when they were asked, what are some of the most pleasant experiences that you had in your life? And they talk about things they did to help others. That really gave them a sense of joy. More joy than buying something or doing something for themselves. Yet often we don't take advantage of that, although there's lots of opportunity. Well, in closing, I would just suggest keep reflecting on what are you becoming. The Buddha has given us a path to follow, and Bhikkhu Bodhi notes, the Buddha calls this Dhamma Ikapasiko, which means come and see for yourself. He invites inquirers to investigate his teaching, to examine it in the light of their own reason and intelligence, and to gain confirmation of the truth for themselves. The Dhamma is said to be personally understood by the wise, and this requires intelligence and sustained inquiry. It requires mindfulness. We have those intentions, but we keep at it. Now, I would say, one thing I want to say before I end is that if you're interested in the talk that I gave tonight, I posted it on our website, Whitehall Meditation. So you can Google that, and over to the right, it says latest recap. And there's a PDF version of what I gave you here in case you'd like to review it. And also, I'm going to ask Judy to post it on the web somehow so you can have it for that.